For centuries, the tale of Vikings reaching America long before Columbus was dismissed as fantasy. But buried in ancient sagas and confirmed by modern discoveries lies a story that rewrites what we thought we knew about exploration and human endurance. This is the real story of Vinland, a mysterious land of wild grapes, fierce natives, and the bold Norsemen who dared to cross the Atlantic nearly 500 years before Columbus set sail. It all begins in the icy reaches of Greenland around the year 985. Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for murder, establishes a Norse colony along Greenland's southwestern coast. Life there is harsh. The climate is brutal, but the settlers, tough and resourceful, survive. Among them is Eric's son, Leif, a man whose name would later become legend. Leif Erikson grew up hearing rumors. Sailors whispered of lands sighted west of Greenland, lands shrouded in mist and mystery. One of these whispers came from Bjarni Herjolfsson, a merchant blown off course during a voyage. He never landed, but what he saw, dense forests, flat coastlines, and no ice, burned into Leif's imagination. Around the year 1000, Leif bought Bjarni's ship and gathered a crew. His goal was not just to find this new land, but to explore, settle, and understand it. He sailed west with courage and supplies, navigating unknown waters in a clinker-built Nar, a Viking ship designed for long-distance trade and sea voyages. No maps, no compass. Just the stars, the wind, and ancestral instincts. After days at sea, the crew sighted a barren, rocky land. Leif named it Helluland, land of flat stones. This was likely the coast of Baffin Island in modern-day Canada. The Norse found little of interest, no timber, no game. They sailed south. The next land was greener and more promising. Leif called it Markland, forest land. Today, historians believe this was Labrador. Trees for shipbuilding and shelter grew thick here. But the expedition didn't stay. They kept sailing. Finally, they reached a place unlike any they had seen before. The climate was milder. Salmon filled the rivers. Grass grew lush. Grapes, wild grapes, were everywhere. Leif named the land Vinland, Wineland. The Norse built houses and settled for the winter, amazed at how rich and welcoming the land seemed compared to Greenland. But was this a permanent colony, or just a temporary outpost? That question has puzzled historians for centuries. The sagas, especially the saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red, tell slightly different stories. In one version, Leif discovers Vinland accidentally. In another, he sets out deliberately. But all agree on certain details: the abundance of resources, the encounters with native peoples, and the sense of awe at a land so different from their icy homeland. The Norse called the indigenous people Skrallings, a word that may have meant wretches or foreigners. The first meetings were peaceful. Trade occurred. Red cloth, milk, and iron tools exchanged for furs and pelts, but tension soon flared. In one saga, a Norse bull charges into the native camp, spooking them and igniting conflict. In another, a Viking kills a native in a misunderstanding. Either way, violence erupted. The settlers, outnumbered and vulnerable, retreated. The dream of a permanent Norse Vinland ended almost as soon as it began. Still, the impact was profound. The Norse had crossed the Atlantic and set foot on American soil nearly 5 centuries before Columbus. They had mapped parts of the North Atlantic unknown to the rest of Europe. They left behind legends, artifacts, and a legacy that would lie hidden beneath skepticism until modern times. For years, scholars treated the Vinland sagas as myths, too vague, too contradictory, and yet the names Helluland, Markland, Vinland pointed to real places. The descriptions of climate and geography matched the Canadian Atlantic coast. There were clues, if anyone dared to believe them. And then came the breakthrough, a windswept headland in Newfoundland called Meadows. In the 1962nd, a quiet revolution began on the northern tip of Newfoundland. Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and his archaeologist wife, Anne Stein Ingstad, were searching for evidence that could tie the Norse sagas to the physical world. Guided by local fishermen and drawn by stories of strange mounds and ruins, they came to a site called Meadows. At first glance, it didn't look like much. Grassy knolls, exposed bedrock, peat bogs. But buried in that soil were answers. Over several summers of excavation, the Ingstads uncovered the unmistakable remains of Norse longhouses, blacksmithing forges, and boat repair workshops. The structures were built of sod, timber, and stone, exactly the way Viking houses were constructed in Iceland and Greenland. But it wasn't just the architecture. Iron nails, rivets, and a bronze cloak pin, all consistent with Viking-era materials, were found at the site. Carbon dating confirmed the timeline. Around the year 1000 CE, suddenly, the sagas weren't just oral legends passed down through generations. They were history, backed by evidence, standing in the soil of North America. Lance or Meadows became the first and, to this day, only widely accepted site of pre-Columbian European presence in the Americas. But what was its true purpose? Scholars now believe it was a base camp, a gateway to Vinland proper, which likely lay farther south. The Norse would have used it for repair, resupply, and staging exploration deeper into the continent. The location made sense. Lanceau Meadows offered a natural harbor, fresh water, and proximity to forests. But winters were harsh, and the surrounding land didn't match the lush descriptions of Vinland found in the sagas. There were no wild grapes in Newfoundland. However, wild grapes do grow farther south, in areas like New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and even Maine. This suggests the Norse explored well beyond what they built. They likely traveled by sea and river in smaller boats. Some sagas describe voyages lasting days beyond the base camp. They may have reached richer lands but chose not to settle due to hostilities with local peoples, or simply because they lacked the numbers to maintain distant colonies. What remains undeniable is the ambition. These were people not only brave enough to cross the Atlantic, but curious enough to push deeper once they arrived. The saga texts support this. In the saga of the Greenlanders, Leif's brother Thorvald tries to establish a more permanent presence. He's killed by natives during a skirmish, and his men flee. Another brother, Thorstein, attempts to recover the body but dies before reaching Vinland. Later, a woman named Gudrid, one of the most remarkable figures in the sagas, makes her own voyage and gives birth to the first known child of European descent born in North America, a boy named Snorri. Gudrid's story is unique. A widow, traveler, and later a pilgrim to Rome, she lived a life that crossed oceans and cultures. Her journey to Vinland wasn't just about survival. It was about faith, exploration, and the promise of a new world. The sagas portray her as wise and respected, and her role adds a deeply human layer to the story of Norse America. Still, the dream of a permanent Norse presence in Vinland faded. The settlements in Greenland persisted for centuries longer, but no other Norse site in the Americas has yet been confirmed. Why did the Vinland experiments fail? There were many reasons. The Norse were few in number. The journey was perilous. Supplies had to be brought from Greenland, itself a fragile outpost. Relations with the indigenous peoples were unstable and often hostile. Perhaps most crucially, the Norse didn't come with the intent of conquest. They lacked the logistical strength to build an empire or defend a colony in the wilderness. They were traders, explorers, and survivors, not invaders. And yet they left a trace, a saga, a memory, and, eventually, a discovery that would change how we understand the history of the New World. When Columbus sailed west in 1492, he was unaware that others had gone before him, that on distant shores Norse axes had cut trees, their forges had burned hot, and their people had gazed into the same forests and rivers with wonder. The story of Lanceau Meadows isn't just about proving the sagas true. It's about rethinking who the first explorers really were, and how far curiosity and courage can carry a people across the unknown. The Norse presence in North America, while brief, planted a seed that continues to spark fascination over 1,000 years later. The story of Vinland challenges the traditional narrative of discovery and forces us to reconsider what exploration truly means, not as a single moment of triumph, but as a scattered collection of attempts, failures, and fleeting contacts across distant shores. The rediscovery of Lanceau Meadows gave the saga traditions a credibility they had long been denied. But the mystery hasn't been solved, only deepened. Was Vinland a single location, or a broad term for multiple coastal areas explored by the Norse? Was it Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, or even farther south along the eastern seaboard? Clues remain, scattered in the sagas, in soil, and in oral traditions that may hold forgotten truths. Some researchers argue that Vinland extended much farther than previously thought. The presence of wild grapes in the sagas suggests a location at least as far south as New Brunswick, or possibly even New England. Timber descriptions match trees not native to Newfoundland. The sagas mention long days, mild winters, and fertile ground, all suggesting a richer, warmer landscape than what we find at Meadows. Speculation has gone even further. Some fringe theories place Norse explorers in the interior of North America, citing stone carvings, strange artifacts, or genetic traces. While most lack scholarly support, they point to a deep desire to know more, to trace a path that history has left mostly obscured. Yet even if no other sites are ever confirmed, the Norse in North America represent something profound. Their journey was the first known contact between Europe and the American continent. It wasn't conquest, colonization, or empire building. It was something older and more human, a search for opportunity, for trade, for land, for survival. They came in wooden ships across an ocean barely understood, with no certainty of what lay ahead, and they made it. The Vinland sagas themselves are more than just historical documents. They are cultural artifacts shaped by the times in which they were written, blending fact with memory, and colored by the values of the Norse world. Heroism, fate, honor, and exploration are constant themes. They reflect a people who saw the sea not as a barrier, but as a path. In these stories, Vinland isn't just a place. It's a symbol of potential, a frontier, a glimpse into a world that could have been where Europe met the Americas in a different way, centuries before the age of sail. A meeting not of conquest, but of curiosity, not of domination, but of contact. Modern archaeology continues to search for answers. Satellite imaging, soil analysis, and advanced dating techniques are being used to look for other Norse sites. Small clues, a bit of iron, a foundation stone, a buried tool could someday open new chapters in the Vinland story. Until then, much remains speculative, but the spirit of exploration continues. In Scandinavia, Vinland has become part of national identity, a proud reminder of the seafaring skill and daring ambition of the Viking Age. In North America, the site at Meadows stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, preserving the evidence of that brief and bold Norse experiment. In the end, perhaps the true legacy of Vinland is not its location, but its lesson. That history is not always linear, that great achievements can be forgotten, buried, and rediscovered. That sometimes the boldest journeys don't end in empire or glory, but in a quiet footprint on a distant shore, waiting to be found again. The Norse came to America, not in waves, not with armies, not to conquer but to explore. They saw forests where others saw fog. They found rivers where others found myths. They crossed an ocean with no maps and reached a world that would not be fully known for centuries. And then, like so many great explorers, they turned back. But their stories did not fade, and neither did their mark on history.